Good afternoon. When I get started, my name is Jim Corrie. I was head of the Head and Neck Service here at Peter Mac for 15 years or more. And so I've managed many head and neck cancer patients with, in common with our speaker today, Dr. Sigston. We would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this place, the land of the Wurundjeri people. I presume you know that that name comes from the word Wurrun, which means the manukau, which is common eucalypt in this area, and Jeri means the plant found in that tree. And so we pay our respects to their elders and the families past and present, and I apologise for our pollution of their land. Anyway, more positive matters. Liz Sigston is an experienced head and neck surgeon at Monash, and she's a member of the ASSOM's training board, a senior lecturer at Monash University's Department of Surgery, a mother, an entrepreneur, an advocate for wellness in medicine, which is much needed, and also for women in leadership. So Liz is going to talk to us today about her work in developing a new sort of concept on carcinogenesis and how did cancer start. I think most of us were taught using the somatic mutation theory. But Liz, I think, is going to challenge our thinking on this topic, and so I'm really looking forward to her talk. Thanks very much. Join me in welcoming Liz.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Jim, for the wonderful introduction. So, as Jim indicated, so my name is Sigston. I'm a head and neck surgeon and cancer researcher based at Monash, so please don't call me against. It's really an honour to be invited to speak to you today to members of Australia's first comprehensive cancer centre, and I believe we have representatives in researchers, educators, and those involved in clinical care. So today we're going to spend the next 15 minutes looking at a new theory of cancer called an emergence framework of carcinogenesis. So I'll just grab my pointer because I'll need this. So before we start, I want to ask, has anyone heard of Max Paint at all? Yeah, quite a few, great. So for those who don't know, Max Paint was a German physicist who's known as the father of quantum physics, and in 1918 was awarded the Nobel Prize for his work. And Max is quoted as saying, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So have a think about that, because it's quite profound. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So what I'd like to invite you to do today is to change the way you look at cancer. What we're going through three areas. So first of all, some basic concepts to make the framework understandable. Secondly, we'll go through the 12 principles that make up the framework. And finally, we'll go through the clinical application of using that framework. So before we get started, I'm sure a few of you are curious as to how a surgeon ended up talking and writing about cancer theory. So that in itself could be an hour discussion. But in a nutshell, my interest in research really came about from a clinical observation. And that was, we could cut out a cancer, we could have clear margins, and yet it could recur. On the other hand, we could cut out a cancer, have close or positive margins, and all of those cancers recur. And in fact, it was one of the findings from the work I did in France. So it's one of the findings from the work I did in France. And so that, to me, says that, look, we need to be looking at something besides morphology when we're looking at assessing margins. And I developed interest in biomarkers. And like a lot of researchers, I had my thing. So I was learning GABA2, the answer to everything. So I was awarded a project grant and I enrolled for a part-time PhD. Research turned out to be a lot slower and a lot harder than I thought. My 4 years turned into a lot more. And then at the end of 2014, I actually took sabbatical leave with the aim of completing my PhD and submitting my thesis. And when I took that time off, I sort of found that, things just weren't gelling together. So I stopped, I took a step back, and I decided to look at things differently. That resulted in me having a conversation with my supervisor, Professor Brian Williams, who's at the Hudson Institute, saying, guess what, Brian? I'm going back to the drawing board and starting again. So I was very lucky with Brian's understanding. Things started to roll from there, and we got some really exciting results. But then I had a problem. When I went to write up the approach I'd taken, which was a systems approach, I was looking for the theory to explain to people how I was thinking about it, couldn't actually find one. So even though there's a lot of stuff in the literature talking about the need for the systems approach in biology and cancer specifically, we don't actually have a framework. So my next conversation with Brian was, guess what, Brian? I can't publish the results yet. We have to write it. We have to write a new theory first. And so we have. So here we are. So I'd like to start off with going through some basic concepts. This is a really different way of thinking. So, Drew touched on cancer theories. So when I looked at the cancer theories, these broadly fall into two groups. There's those that see cancer as a genetic disease, where the genes are in the driver's seat and responsible for everything. Then there's those that see cancer as a disorganisation of tissue, where genes are irrelevant and in fact kicked off the bus. The somatic mutation theory is the most modern form of cancer as a genetic disease. Even though the history of that is quite long, this is where we're up to at the moment. And it was sort of summarised by Hannon and Weiner in two of their papers for hallmarks of cancer, so one in 2000 and one in 2011. And the key concepts of it say, cancer is a disease of genetic mutation. Cancer is derived from a single somatic cell. Initiation, and therefore the process of carcinogenesis, is irreversible. And then they have this default state, which they say is quiescence. That means if you take a cell and stick it somewhere, it's not going to divide, it's just going to sit there. It says the adjacent tissue has a supporting role in carcinogenesis. And this is where we get a little bit into the mindset. So it's what we call a reductionist philosophy. So under this theory, the idea is you can break everything down to its parts, and you can explain it by looking and examining those parts. And that the cause is at one level. And this proposes that the cause is at the level of the gene. And what we have is actual upward causation. So everything that's happening in the tissue, including cancer, is due to the genes. The alternative theories, which have been popularised by Bonischen and Soto, is the tissue organisation field theory. And so in contrast to the SMT theory, this considers cancer to be a disease of tissue organisation comparable to organogenesis or morphogenesis. So the same things that happen in development is really what's happening when we see cancer. And cancer is due to a breakdown of the tissue architect and the normal cell-to-cell communication. So they say the default state of the cell is prolificity with variation in motility, which is the opposite to quiescent. In this theory, which I like this one, carcinogenesis is reversible. I like that idea. And they use, when we talk about philosophies, a holistic or an anti-reductionist philosophy. So what they're saying is that the phenomena caused happening at the tissue level not only is responsible for what's happening at the tissue level, but it's responsible for causing the mutations in the genes. So the tissue disorganisation happens first, and the genetic mutations just a byproduct. So you can see we've kind of given two very diametric opposing views on how cancer works. And yet there's plenty of evidence to say that they both could be right and they both could be wrong. So moving on to the next pieces that we need to understand, and this is where it starts getting a bit different from probably what you've heard before. We're going to talk about what emergence is and what a complex system is. And this probably sums it up in the best way. Essentially, that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Okay, so the whole is more than the sum of its parts. So emergence is where you have a property that manifests or arises to create a complex system. The parts of that system don't have that property. So it's only when they're all together that they'll have that property. That new property is not simply adding up the properties of the parts. So it's not what we call a linear relationship, it's a non-linear relationship. And this is what we term as being qualitative, not quantitative. So what's a complex system? So basically, to have a complex system, you need to have at least 2 or more precursors. And these combine to form a new object that has a new property, which we call the emergent property. It has a bonding structure, which enables self-organisation. So this is different to a simple association. To have a bonding structure requires investment of energy and or time, and it's much rarer than a simple association. It needs to have a mechanism, which is a process or a set of processes that allow this new property and this new system to come into being. Now, complex systems are not static, they're not dynamic, so they're changing over time. And they also have what's called a point of self-criticality, which means that at a certain point, a very small change can create a massive big system change. It's a bit like when you build that sand castle up and you put that last thing on top and the whole thing falls down. That's what we talk about self-organised criticality. Now, we kind of mentioned about levels, so low levels, high levels. So when we're talking about a level, we're talking about things that have a certain property in common. So it's the combination of the lower levels that combine together to create something at a higher level with a new property. So as we go up, we're getting new properties emerging. So every higher level property has a property that none of its parts have. Now the level that you're working with actually depends on what it is that you're interested in. So there's not a fixed number or a fixed name for any level. That will fluctuate depending on that point of interest. So this is an example of looking at emergence and how things work. So if we start with the oxygen and hydrogen atoms, individually, they're gases at atmospheric temperature. They're actually flammable. It's quite ironic because they come together and they form water. As a water molecule, it has the property of polarity, which the individual molecules themselves don't have. When you get enough of those molecules, so when it reaches that point of self-criticality, those water molecules will form together and create a drop. So as you see, as we go up, we're getting new properties coming out, and that's what we call emergence. If you lose those properties, so say a water drop hits the ground, it disperses, the molecules become separated, and eventually with the changes in atmospheric temperature, they might return back to being just hydrogen and oxygen atoms. Going down is called the subregions. Now to make it more complex, a complex system actually doesn't exist on its own, apart from the layers. It actually has to interact with nature. And so this creates an additional structure we need to consider when we're looking at complex systems. You have an internal structure, which we call the endostructure, and then you have to have an exostructure, so how that system interacts with its surrounding environment. So we can actually define a complex system using an equation, and this is based on some work done by a gentleman called Mario Bunge. So he's an Argentinian nuclear physicist, and he's a well-known scientific philosopher. And his approach to things is to try to make the philosophies and thought process actually applicable to science. And so we can describe a system as being a combination of its composition, the environment that it's in, its structure, so both its internal structure and its external structure, and the mechanism that caused it to come into being. And this gives us an equation. So we can write it as this equation where we use U to represent the system. So it looks complicated, it's actually quite simple. Now if we were to work with this, the problem is we have to know everything about that system to make sense. And that's, again, not very practical. So what we can do is use what's called a logical intercept. So this is actually saying, well, let's be a bit smart about things. Let's actually just focus on what we need to do. So we can limit our scale of investigation to what actually really matters. And this creates a modifying formula, but with the same outline of having the C, the S, the E, the S, and the N. So now if you look at our water drop as a complex system, you have the composition, which is the water molecules. You have the environment, which is the air that it's around, and also the gravity, which helps produce its shape. You have the structure, so the internal structure is the hydrogen bonds between the water molecules. And then you have the external structure, so which is the bonds between the water molecules and the air molecules. The emergent property is surface tension, and that occurs due to the mechanism of cohesion, so the forces between the water molecules being stronger than the forces between the water molecules and the air. And so we get a new property. So that sort of gives you sort of some background of where we're going. Now, just to make it a bit more complicated, systems are dynamic. They just don't stay still. They're changing with time. So we need a way to be able to say, when we look at a system, what point in time is it at? And so we can use what's called a state-space arrangement. And I've used a really simple explanation here. So if we think of the property of swinging, so a pendulum swinging, at any point in time, that's going to be a function of its position and its momentum as it comes through in the swing. And we know that the law of that system is that energy is constant. So kinetic energy and potential energy are always going to be constant. So when we apply that and we map out the swinging of the pendulum, we can actually get a two-dimensional graph that shows us the history or the likely state of the system at any point in time. If someone comes along and gives that pendulum a big push, its energy will increase and you'll get the bigger circle. Now when you have more variables, it becomes a bit more complicated because you're going to end up with 3 dimensions or 4 dimensions, and if you're really clever, you might end up trying to drive actually 4 or 5 dimensions. But this is important, and you'll see as we go through why. So now thermodynamics, and you're probably thinking, now what has thermodynamics got to do with cancer? Well, this is actually a physical theory, and it is about heat and temperature in relation to energy and work. The thing that's really interesting about thermodynamics is that at the macroscopic level, it makes no assumptions about what's going on below, so that it's always right. You could be totally wrong about what's happening at the microscopic level, but the macroscopic properties remain. The other important thing is that the energy in the system is constant. So you have energy that's available for use, and you have energy that's disordered and not available for use. Now, the second law of thermodynamics says that the universe is constantly aiming towards a state of maximal entropy or thermodynamic equilibrium, which means basically sitting still doing nothing. Now, and this is where it relates to cancer and biology, that living things are actually able to defy the second law. And they do that through the process of metabolism. So what living things do, and what defines a living thing, is its ability to acquire energy from the environment. So this does a number of things. It allows the development of complexity, and that's why living things are complex. If we have loss of that ability to continue to acquire energy, we get entropy. And what happens? We get aging and we get dying. This is my favourite slide because it's the prettiest. The fractals is a representation of almost what we call chaos in space. And so when we look at a fractal, it's an unusual shape. And it has some unusual properties. So self-similarity is, if you see in the first picture, as you magnify, you see the same pattern over and over. And it doesn't matter how small you get, that pattern continues. And that's called self-similarity. The other things about fractals is that, unlike a cube or a circle, they have non-integer dimensions. So it could be 1.6. So the complexity of a fractal is represented by that number. It has rough outlines, so you never see a block or a smooth shape. And because it has that self-similarity, so every time you go smaller, you can measure a bit more, it actually has what's called an infinite length. So nature has actually mastered this, and we see it every day in all around us. So in the way that trees grow, in the blood system in our body. And believe it or not, that's actually a broccoli with that beautiful one down the bottom. So the appearance of a fractal represents the emergence of a new system. So the last bit in the back of the concepts is just to touch on chaos. So if you look at chaos dynamics as a function of time, so chaos and complexity share the property of having non-linear dynamics. So when we talk about non-linear, it means there's not a simple mathematical equation that we can apply to find out the answer. The difference is complexity controls that by creating oscillations, or what we see in living things is biological clocks. In chaos, you have loss of those oscillations, and this leads to what's called unpredictability. And then you also have high sensitivity to small changes. So in something in chaos, a very, very small change can create a massive difference down the track. So if you have two cells that mutate just slightly different, down the track over time, they're going to end up with very different outcomes. Okay, so that's sort of given some background to where we're heading. So now we'll move into the framework principles. So we've devised the framework so that anyone can apply it, and there's some principles to help guide that. So this is whether you're working at the bench or working at the bedside. So first principle, principle one, this is really about, well, what's the level that we're looking at for cancer? And so we can define cancer as being a dynamic complex system and emerging at the level of the functional tissue unit. So that is a word I've made up, and I'll explain what that means in a minute. So why would we choose that level? Well, cancer is characterised by alterations in cell and tissue structure. When we make a diagnosis of cancer, we don't look at the gene, and whilst we may look at the patient and be pretty sure they got cancer, the diagnosis is a histological diagnosis. That's how we've chosen to define that disease. So therefore, that's the level we need to be looking at. The cancer system actually arises from and replaces the normal system. And what we're seeing is not just changing morphology, which is what we've tended to base our findings and our assessments on, but we're also seeing a change in physiology, and we also have a loss in function. So functional tissue unit, what's this? So this is the minimal tissue system required for an organ's perform its function. It's defined by the specific function that it's actually performing. So and this is not a single tissue, but a combination of tissue. So it's not just the epithelium, it's not just connective tissue, it's whatever that combination of tissues is that's required for the performance of the function. And it could be that some organs have multiple functional tissue units, like pancreas. So let me give a couple of examples. So the first one is mammary acini, and this is supported by work done by a lady called Nina Bissell, who's done 3D growing of mammary acini. And what they found is that in the 3D setting, it was only when you put the epithelium and the stroma together that you actually got a functional unit. The mucous membrane is something I'm a bit more familiar with, and as you can see, this is not just our epithelium, but it's a salivary pedicle, it's the basement membrane, and it's a laminar propria. And this is really important when we start looking at cancer as a system. So the first part of any research is actually to define the functional tissue unit that we're looking at. And so we can put our functional tissue unit into that equation that I showed you earlier. So the oral mucous membrane has the emergent properties of a barrier function and lubrication. And when you map it out as a CESM, you get something that looks like this. So we've got it divided into the composition, the environment it works in, its structure, and the mechanisms. This is obviously a summary rather than the full amount. So that leads into principle 2. So as we've talked about, if cancer arises from the functional tissue unit, but we have lots of different functional tissue units, then cancer is simply not a single disease, it's multiple disease. So different organs will have different functional tissue units, and so we need to assess each of those units before we then determine what the cancer is. So as each of that functional tissue unit will have its own CSM, the cancer arising from it will have its own CSM that will be different to a cancer arising from somewhere else. And an example of this is Notch 1, where in leukemia it's considered an oncogen, but in oral cancer it's considered to be a tumour suppressor. So what we then do is we can then drop our oral squamous cell carcinoma as a system, and we have a change from the functional tissue unit into the cancer system. As this occurs, we have loss of the barrier function and lubrication function, and the new properties we're seeing are that of replication, invasion, and the potential to metastasize. And so if we look at our map that we had, we can start mapping out where things might be changing to cause cancer. So principle 3. So now you remember at the start I talked about causation in the two different theories, how one says genes are the driver and in charge, and the other one says, well, genes shouldn't even be on the bus. And what we're saying is that causation's at different levels. So in this framework, what we're actually saying, well, you know what? Maybe genes do have a role in cancer. And you know what? Maybe tissue organisation has a role in cancer. And guess what? You may actually need to have to work together. So what this allows for is that causation is not restricted to any single level. And in fact, many causes can happen at the same time in producing cancer. So what we're saying is, you know, genes and tissue, you both get to be on the bus, but you're not necessarily the driver. Principle 4, and this is really included to really deal with that difference in opinion about what the default state of the cell is. So really the state of the cell in a system is determined both by the system and by its position in that system. So when there's all living things metabolized, it's never going to be one thing, it's going to change. So we're never really, in this framework of talking about systems, ever going to be considering a single cell on its own, which really makes defining what a default state as irrelevant. So we don't need to worry about it. We can say that doesn't make those two ideas incompatible. It just doesn't really matter for how we're deciding to analyse cancer. Right, so we're talking about principle 5. So remember I mentioned about systems being dynamic and having oscillations. So the same thing with the functional tissue units. They're going to have an oscillation. And there's going to be a balance between providing the function and the response to the environment where they can undergo repair, growth, or whatever else is required. We can represent that by an equation where function and growth and repair are inversely related. And it'll create a really nice simple graph that looks like this. And as you can see, in the middle, here, this is where a healthy tissue unit sits. So it's oscillating, it's not stuck at any one point, but it's moving slightly towards increased function and then slightly towards increased repair. So an example of towards increased repair would be when you have wound healing. There's a need for that to fix itself so it can return to function. On the other hand, if you have a tissue unit swinging too far the other way, you could get something like chronic hyperparathyroidism. It stops interacting with the environment. It keeps functioning, but it's just forgot to respond to the environment, so it can't respond. So when we talk about systems coming into systems, so this comes back to when we were talking about self-organised criticality. So we can have that in both directions. And when we reach those points, either a system will emerge or a system will submerge. So again, if we look at with our functional tissue unit, we can pretty much call these a tipping point. So at some point along that scale, that system is going to tip over and collapse. So either towards chaos or towards entropy and become degenerate and disappear. And this is an example of how potentially we could use that clinically. So this is using some results from a gentleman called Mortimer. He clearly didn't use this framework. But what he looked at was the expression of laminin gamma 2 in situ carcinoma lesions. And they found that if those lesions did not express laminin gamma 2, those lesions never progress to be invasive. On the other hand, if they did, there's a 40% chance that that would go towards invasive cancer. So we could say that the expression of laminin gamma 2 could be a signal that that disease is approaching a tipping point and is about to become cancer. So the next couple of principles sort of work a bit more around related to risk factors, and they're based on the concept of redundancy. So when you have a reduced redundancy, there then becomes an increased risk of cancer. So what do we mean about that? So redundancy is what gives the system its resilience or its robustness. So what that means is that you have more than you need, and that could be of the functional tissue units, and it can also be of the components of the tissue units themselves. And so then this allows for entropic units to be removed without loss of organ function. It allows for apoptosis, the cells that sort of really shouldn't be there to be removed without loss of function. And it also allows for functional tissue units that are maybe pushed far towards that chaos side, perhaps by something like chronic inflammation, to be removed without impacting function. So this is what's happened. This is what happens with aging. We actually have a loss of complexity, and this has been demonstrated in work that's been done around gait, cardiac physiology, and some neurophysiology. And with loss of complexity, we have a loss of redundancy. So what does this mean? It means that we have to end up keeping some of those entropic units, the ones that still function, but they're not responding to the environment as well. So then that can get to the point where it's not communicating with the environment, that it might actually be seen as a foreign body, and we can see the emergence of an autoimmune disease. It's also unable to respond to the need to repair if called upon. Also, if we haven't got that redundancy, it reduces our ability to be able to remove those tissues that have gone too far into chaos. And so then we start getting some loss of tissue organisation. And so what this extrapolates to is that the incidence of cancer increases with age due to loss of redundancy or resilience. And that's supported by the age incident curves that were actually used to design the segmentation theory. So again, when we look at risk factors, we're looking at the concept of redundancy. So a risk factor will be anything that reduces the redundancy faster than the normal aging process. And so this is where things like smoking, drinking, chronic trauma start coming in, because they're actually reducing our redundancy and our ability to carry on, and our tissues, the ability to carry on function. So what this is, principle 9, what we're talking about is creating what's called an initial state. So as something transitions from one system to another, there's kind of a little space in between which is called the initial state. And a system needs to be in that, so where things are just starting to fall apart a bit, so something else new can emerge. So what this means is that cancer cannot arise in a healthy functional tissue unit. And we basically have two initial state points. So we have the one that's pushing things towards chaos, going up that scale. We've got excessive energy being taken in by the system, and that actually creates the state for there to be enough energy for the development of a new system. Because remember, we need energy to create a system. At the other end, with entropy, there's such a loss of energy that it's not taken in from the environment, it actually falls apart. And that results in allowing the energy to become available to things at a lower level. So if you imagine you have your two little swimming curves like this, the entropy then connects down to the chaos region of the level below. And so we can have cancer developing from either end. So principle 10, and this is quite important and relevant to a lot of the research that's going on today. So cancer is a new system, and it's arising from all the tissue components of the functional tissue unit. And we see that it's lost its normal self-organisation, so they've become available to be arranged. And we see changes in physiology and morphology. So we can say that cancer arises from chaos. And though it's been described as disordered growth, It's actually not. So it arises from chaos, but it's not chaos. And what's the evidence for that? Well, we know that cancers have predictable patterns. We know that an oral cancer is going to spread to the neck first and then spread to the chest. And that's the pattern that happens. We see fractal patterns being exhibited by tumours and cancer cells, which is an indication of complexity. And the other important thing is that all of the components of the functional tissue unit are utilised by the cancer to create the system. So when we talk about a cancer system, we're not just talking about the tumour parenchyma, we're talking about the stroma as well. They work together and feed together to create the properties that we define cancer by. So in Principle 11, we're now talking about how cancer itself can progress. So from going from, say, a well-differentiated cancer to an undifferentiated cancer or to a metastatic disease. And this is really the system of ongoing evolution and new systems. So this fits in with a lot of the concepts coming about now about looking at cancer being an evolutionary problem. So again, we can follow what those patterns are. So initially in an epithelial cancer we'll have growth, then we'll have dysplasia, we'll then have invasion, local metastatic disease, distant metastatic disease, and then you have the ultimate destruction of the host. And it's always that pattern. And so what's the evidence for this? So as you will recall right at the start, to create a new system, you need energy. And if we look at the energy dynamics of cancers, we see that there's a lot of evidence supporting that cancers use increasing amounts of energy as they progress through the spectrum of severity. So everyone will be familiar with increased glycolysis, which causes the Wahlberg effect. And that's what we actually use, or that's the principle that we use when we're doing our PET scans. So one of the things that was surprising is that it was thought the Wahlberg effect was making up the mitochondria that don't work. But what's been shown is that cancer cells actually have extremely healthy mitochondria. And they do this through a process called mitophagy. So anything that's got a mutation or might affect its functioning, it actually self-destroys those, so all the components can be released to maintain the health of mitochondria. Cancer cells also release radical oxygen species, and this increases the lactate produced by the stroma cells, particularly the fibroblasts. That in turn feeds back and gives the fuel to the tumour cells. Angiogenesis is typical of cancer, and then we see ultimately the formation of cachexia. Further work's been done looking at the appearance of fractals in cancer, and we can see this in neoangiogenesis. People have used cancer-specific fractal geometry to actually start looking at the tissue level and analysing tumour perimeters to see if that helps determine how far the cancer's progressed. And then there's a really lovely study that actually caught pre-malignant cells from cervical epithelia transforming into malignant cells, and in that process of transformation, they actually exhibited fractal patterns. The other thing we can do is when we're looking at dynamics is to actually use that space methodology that we talked about at the start with the pendulum. And that's why it's important, because we can actually talk about a property and how it changes over time, and have some things that we can measure to explain a property that's more qualitative. And then the final principle is that the concept of this framework is that it allows for bi-directional translational research. So whether you start at the bench or whether you start at the bedside, we can all come back to the same point of starting, which is at the functional tissue unit. So it allows us to have a point of integration. And it's workable with the definitions of most countries' research councils. It allows you to start anywhere. So you don't have to start at the bench top and work out. You can come up with a clinical problem and come back and fit it into the framework. So this allows us to start integrating, cross-referencing, and it's really important to have a framework when we start talking about the use of bioinformatics, and particularly when we start looking at quantum computing and artificial intelligence. So that sounds important. It all sounds like lots of theory, but this is actually what we apply in doing this research. So, and I'll go through this quickly. I won't go through a lot of the details, but we'll get to the results. So I started with this question. Why do cancers with clear margins occur, and why do cancers that have a positive margin don't? So this is the hypothesis that after reviewing everything, I went back into the case. So the idea is by using the state-space methodology and the systems framework, we can then assess biological margins in oral squamous cell carcinoma to better predict recurrence, compared to morphological margins alone. So the first thing we did was to define the oral mucous membrane. So you can see I've added in here a few more things, particularly over here. So I'm talking about that principle 11, that progression. So mechanism was very important, composition was important, environment not so important for what I was doing, and structure, yeah, sort of maybe, but not really. So these were the two areas that were really of interest to me. And they had to make about 60 pages when they were written out before. So then it was defining the cancer system. So pretty much what we did is take all of those mechanisms and all of those compositions and map them out, initially on a very big whiteboard. And what we're looking for was a few things. First of all, what can we see at the tissue level? Because we're talking about a tissue level disease. And then secondly, what's actually at the end of all those pathways that are interconnecting that actually can give us some information about what's happening in the state of the tumour. And we came up with 4 potential biomarkers. So P63, which many of you may have heard of, so it's a very common marker for epithelial tissue. Very important in embryogenesis, has a key role in stratification, so very important in the mucous membrane because it's stratified epithelia. And it normally has small amounts in the basal cells. Will increase a bit with wound healing. And what's been noted is that this is overexpressed in 80% or more of head and neck cancers. It works as a blocker of the tumour suppressors P53 and P73, mainly through competition. And this appears early in pathogenesis, which kind of makes sense because if it goes up when we have healing and we're talking about constant repair and healing, pushing things over the edge, we'd expect it to be an early phenomenon. The other thing is that it's expressed in the nucleus, which actually ended up coming in very handy for us, as you'll see. The next one we looked at was E-cadherin. So this is a transmembrane glycoprotein. That's really important for organisational structure in epithelia. So it anchors the cytoskeleton to the wall, but also it anchors the cells together. So it actually provides tissue cohesiveness. This is actually lost in a process called epithelial mesenchymal transition. So this is a process that allows epithelial cells to transform into mesenchymal cells so they actually get to move around. Because as an epithelial cell, you're pretty much stuck. So you need to change your form to be able to move. So E-cadherin is lost in that process. And that would normally occur in morphogenesis. It occurs in healing. And it's also been described to occur in cancer. And then we looked at vimentin, which is an intermediate filament, and it is expressed in mesenchymal tissues and in particular in fibroblasts. It's associated with an increased risk of metastases and invasion if it's in an epithelial type cell, and it's expressed in EMT as well, which makes sense because you have the loss of the E-cadherin and you have increasing mesenchymal expression, which is vimentin. And there was some evidence to suggest that it might be increasing expression in line with P63. And then the last one, because I really wanted to fit it in there, but it did fit, was the laminin gamma 2. So laminins are critical components of the basement membrane, and in fact they're responsible not just only for their composition, but they perform the anchorage of the epithelial to the mesenchymal tissue, and they actually trigger the formation of the basement membrane, so it's quite a key molecule. The cleavage of the gamma-Y fragment actually increases cell motility. So we see that as being increased in wound healing. Now it's also been expressed in cytoplasms of cells in the front of head and neck cancers. And increased accumulation in the cytoplasm has been associated with increased metastases and invasion. And this is because it becomes a disconnect between the 3 chains. And so that the alpha chain becomes underproduced, and so you're having excess of these gamma chains being produced and it accumulates. So then we needed to define our state space. So we predicted that going from normal epithelium to an undifferentiated cancer, we're going to see different amounts of these biomarkers as things progress. So E-cataherin will go down, laminin 2 will go up, dimension will go up, and then P63 initially probably quite high, but some evidence to suggest when it gets to very, very poorly differentiated, might actually become underexpressed. So the other thing that we found was that E-cataherin and laminin gamma 2 had an inverse proportional relationship. And because the negative marker is really hard to measure because we don't know what the baseline is, so we got rid of the E-cataherin and looked at the 3. And so we created this formula. So basically we're saying that recurrence is going to be a function of the level of P63, laminin gamma 2, and vimentin, where T is the time of resection. So what's staining at that time? That's pretty hard to do all these biomarkers, so we had to, I'll come to that in a minute. So this is just the background. We work with oral cancers, and we're looking at first cancers only. But we had to actually come up with a different way of staining. So what we came up with was a dual immunohistochemistry staining. And this is done with 2 of the antibodies are in most labs anyway, so the laminin 2 we have to do in. And we did this on standard equipment, so there's nothing special about what we've actually done, we're just doing it in a different way. So we took 3 slides from the invasive funded for cancers. The first one we did standard H&E. The second one was P63 laminin dual staining, and the third one P63 environmental dual staining. So those slides were reviewed by one of my pathology colleagues, and the first one he looked at was the H&E stains. He was making sure there was cancer cells in it. So we looked at the grade, invasive front, perimural lymphovascular invasion, and what the inflammatory response was. And that's because all of these have been linked potentially to establishing what the prognosis is. With our P63 and laminin, we looked at the percentage of co-expression at the invasive front. What we did notice, which was quite exciting, was this was staining in front of where the P63 was. And then we did the same with the P63 environment and looked at the percentage of co-staining. And this is what our stains look like. So in this one, this is laminin gamma 2 is the pink, and the P63 is the brown. On this side, it's a lot more florid, and that's because vimentin stains mesenchymal tissue. So without the P63 staining, we wouldn't know if it was a cancer cell or if it was a mesenchymal tissue. So this way has allowed us to differentiate between the two. So you can see here, and probably better on this one, that the nucleus is brown and the vimentin is staining in the cytoplasm. So we know that that's a cancer cell and not a stromal cell. And this just shows the laminin that was staining in front of the P63. So unfortunately, a number of our sites didn't have cancer on them, so we had to remove them. And so we ended up with 55 patients with a full set of slides that have had follow-up for a minimum of 5 years, some of them now up to 10 years, or death, whatever happened first. I guess the important things on this one is just that most had neck dissections, most had adjunct radiotherapy, and what was interesting, there's quite a high recurrence rate, and we know oral cancers are fairly aggressive disease, and this supports that finding. When we looked at the margins, so this was all taken from the original histology reports, and we've worked on what the closest margins were. So 17 is what we call an adequate margin. We had 14 that were maybe not quite so adequate. These ones we would call close, and 6 of these patients had re-excision. These ones were positive, so they actually had cancer at the margin. 10 of them were re-excised, and 1 patient refused. We had 2 where we couldn't actually work out the size of the margins were because they hadn't actually been reported, but they were both T4 cancers, 1 recurred and 1 didn't. And this was a surprising result. It wasn't what I was expecting. What we found on univariate analysis, that P63 vimentin dual staining is incredibly predictive of recurrence, so 0.003. And it's got an extremely high confidence ratio, so we can be more than 95% certain that this is not by chance. In compared to, this was the margins predictive value, which actually wasn't really predictive. And that sort of fits with what, what we see clinically. So were there other factors involved in making this stand out? So when we adjusted for both the size of the margins and re-excision, this remained an independent predictive factor. So in summary, what we can say is that for every 1% of P63 by mentioning co-staining, there's a 2% increased risk of recurrence. And so essentially anyone who had more than about 45% of co-staining all got recurrence. And it was independent of whether their tumours were re-excised, their margins, or if they had adjunct therapy. So what this means is we could potentially use this stain, which is really simple, very cheap, probably been sitting under our noses for years, to actually identify those high-risk patients that may benefit from alternative treatment regimes. So by taking a step back and looking at things differently, allowed me to come up with something I would never have thought of. And that's the advantage of having this sort of framework to work with. It opens the doors to patterns and possibilities. So I'd just like to note that I've had funding from Garnet Carson Rodney Williams Memorial Fund and from the Department of Surgery. And thank my supervisors, particularly Brian Williams, for being very, very patient with me and taking so long to actually get around to doing my PhD. And to Julie Smith, who's my other supervisor, and Neil Balance, who was head of our at that time. So I'd like to thank you and invite you.